So I've been playing Extermination. You know, I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this game. I mean, it's an old survival horror game for the PS2 inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing, so I did expect snow, limited ammo, awkward controls, and yeah, that's exactly what I got. But the thing is, the game's story was written by Hidetaka Suehiro, aka Swery, aka the guy what made Deadly Premonition. So I was kinda hoping there would be more to the game than what I initially expected. So yeah, let's find out if this game has the potential to be a hidden gem. So the story of Extermination takes place in the mystical year of 2005, at a top-secret research facility in Antarctica no less. You play as the ever-so charismatic Dennis Riley, a generic sergeant, part of a generic squad called Team Red Light. They receive a distress call from said research facility, and so they scoot their sexy asses on over to find out what the deal is. Insert nuclear zombie monsters who totes don't look like Nemesis, I swear you guys really, come on, to ruin their day. Now, the voice acting and lip syncing in this game are both really bad.
The air duct is here. It should lead into the compound. First, get your ass up here. Come on!
This ice cliff looks impossible.
What's also really weird is that a lot of the audio seems to be slowed down.
Sergeant Dennis Riley, U.S. Marine Special Recon.
Like, everyone sounds like a drunk Christopher Walken. I'm not sure if it's just the game performing poorly, or if this actually is some really weird and backwards way of syncing the audio to the cutscenes. Anyway, the game does have a few plot twists and a couple of emotional moments here and there, and they end up being hilarious because of it. Now, as you may have noticed, this game is really ugly looking for a PS2 game. That's because it was one of the first games to be released on the system, and it was even used to showcase its power before release. But yeah, the game kinda looks like a slightly less jaggy PS1 game. It also doesn't help that the overall art direction has more shades of grey than Nazi Germany. So you'll mostly be looking at snow, and concrete, and snow, and concrete, and snow. That said, it does do a pretty good job of conveying what it's trying to convey. For instance, the snow effects and the sensation that it's actually really cold out there are done convincingly enough. And they even do that Metal Gear thing by adding little spatters to the character model to make it look like Dennis is actually getting snowed on. And the soundtrack also does a good job of adding to the overall atmosphere. When you find yourself in a dark and eerie tunnel, the music is tense. And when you're outside, the music calms the fuck down and starts to use really icy pads and synthesized glockenspiels. It's a little generic, and not completely unlike a certain other popular survival horror series, but if you are going to shamelessly rip something off, you might as well do a good job of recreating what made the original work. Now, on the gameplay front, it doesn't really do anything to expand on the survival horror genre. The words generic and mediocre come to mind. You get the limited ammo, the awkward controls, the limited saves, and the Danny DeVito
For the game!
And the only thing this game really has going for it is a feature called the infection system. Whenever an enemy attacks Dennis, not only does he take damage, but his infection rate increases as well. Should the bar fill up, Dennis will indeed become infected, and his max health will be lowered and he'll also lose health constantly. Also, any kind of physical contact with water will do damage as well. And since there are puddles, pools, and melting snow everywhere, having this happen to you would be pretty inconvenient. I actually like this mechanic though. It adds to the already plentiful reasons of why you want to avoid fighting. That said, I only got infected twice over the entire course of the game, cause avoiding all of the enemies was pretty easy. It's not like Resident Evil where there's a lot of tight corridors that make avoiding the zombies a lot harder to do. It's only near the end of the game where there are some really pesky enemies that are able to hit you from a far distance. But by the time that happened, I'd already saved up such a large amount of items that I didn't really have any problems healing myself at all. Maybe it's just because I was being overly cautious, but I still couldn't help but feel like the game may not have been balanced as well as something like Resident Evil. Also, Dennis carries around a battery pack, which is used to power machines and for practical things like saving. Now of course, the battery pack has a limited amount of power, so sometimes you need to sacrifice saving in order to progress. Or at least, I think that's the initial idea. It's just that I never had one of those ink ribbon moments where you seriously need to debate on whether or not the progress you made so far is actually worth saving. I mean, most save stations in the game usually have a battery charger sitting right next to it, and whenever the game has a part where you need to use it to activate some kind of machine, there's often a charger nearby as well. So, it's a mechanic that could have added a lot of tension and planning in a game that does everything in its power to prevent that from happening. Anyway, as I've mentioned before, the game has awkward controls. And I don't mean tank controls or anything like that. Like, the game does that thing that whenever you stop walking, Dennis decides to take a few extra steps as he slows down gradually. So, doing simple things that require precision like trying to save or picking up an item can be a little hard to do sometimes. In a stark contrast to that though, there's actually a pretty large amount of platforming and climbing for a survival horror game, and it isn't half bad either. Dennis can run, jump, and hang from ledges at a speed that isn't all that bad for a game in a genre usually associated with tank controls and block puzzles. The only thing that really gets in your way here is the camera. The problem is that you can't control the camera yourself other than snapping it behind you by going in and out of first person mode. And it's not like the game makes up for it by having really cool camera angles like Resident Evil or Silent Hill either. Instead, it's just like one of those really dated PS1 era cameras that just does whatever the fuck it wants to. And I know the game was released all the way back in 2001, which does make it somewhat understandable, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating to play through. Anyway, the game isn't really anything special, and it's dated as all hell, but it certainly isn't a bad game. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a hidden gem though. That said, if you happen to really love the first 4 Resident Evil games, you might want to give it a try. For as far as I know, it isn't a rare game or anything like that, and it only cost me about €5. So there's no need for any crazy dick-sucking antics or whatever it is you game collectors usually go through. Anyway, it definitely isn't the kind of masterpiece that Deadly Premonition was. Then again, that's kinda like saying Penguin Adventure isn't the masterpiece you hoped it was after playing Metal Gear Solid. This is just one of the games Swery worked on before he got the creative freedom he has today. And while I knew that going into it, I still kinda hoped that some of his creative writing may have shined through an otherwise mediocre experience.
But alas, it was not to be.